We have statistics now that show that 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 individuals has fatty liver disease. And if they don't go to solve it, they'll end up with cirrhosis.
I eat healthy and I exercise. Am I still possibly at risk of fatty liver?
We know that a poor diet is also related to depression and anxiety. So even from a nutritional psychology standpoint, how do we find a dietary pattern that fits better with mental health, that makes us feel good about today?
Even though I think we've made such big moves in this, but we still think that healthy people are the skinny people, right? And that is just so not the case.
When you get on these drugs, do you need to be on them for life? And if you're not on them for life, when you get off the drug, they come back with a vengeance.
But even if you eat the healthiest of diets, do you still need to take supplements to supplement what you're not getting? Or is it entirely possible to get everything from food?
Oldish, the show where age-old questions meet new-age answers. With your hosts, Randy Spelling, Brian Austin Green, and Sharna Burgess.
Kristin Kirkpatrick, welcome to Oldish.
Yeah!
Yay.
We're so excited to have you.
Welcome, Kristin.
I am so excited. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much. It's such an honor.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So you are a registered dietitian of the Cleveland Clinic Department of Integrative Medicine. You are a best-selling author, and you are going to be here today to talk to us about all things, metabolic health.
Liver.
Liver.
A lot of work that you've done around that, which we found fascinating actually when we were looking into that. So much of your research is around liver health. And we had questions on how did that come to be your focus? Why the liver?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was writing my first book and people would say oh, what's the book about? I was almost slightly embarrassed. I would avert my eyes and put my head down and be it's about the liver. I just think right? People are what? It's about what? I thought you were going to write a weight loss book or something. But really where it came to be was that I had dozens and dozens and dozens of patients coming to see me. And the one thing they said is, my doctor tells me I have something called fatty liver. There's no medication for it. They just said to go see a dietitian, so here I am. So really, there was no guide. There was no guidance on what to do if you were someone that is struggling with liver health. And I just figured no one else is doing it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to write the guide. So that's really where this came to be.
So it was just out of necessity. It was most of the time what you heard from people was my liver is shot. I'm done. I've finished it.
My liver is shot, or my liver enzymes are up and I don't know what that means, and I don't want to get cirrhosis. Am I going to get cirrhosis? So there's a lot of confusion about it. I think people just think of, if you went on the street and said, what does your liver do? Probably 90% of people would say, oh, it detoxifies when I drink.
That's exactly.
That's it.
Right.
It's just,
right. Yeah. Add me into that 90%.
Right.
I'm absolutely one of those.
I know nothing about my liver.
Please explain otherwise, because I have no idea other than that.
Yeah. So, when your liver doesn't function, neither does the rest of the body. So that's really the high level way to look at this, that the liver is responsible not only for the metabolism of vitamins and minerals, it's also responsible for your sex hormones. It is responsible for detoxification, not just of alcohol, but you walk out and walk over to the store, you are getting toxins at you every single minute from pollution, from things like that. So the liver detoxifies everything and then goes ahead and does everything else. It also manages blood sugar. It helps with management of lipids. So even though it doesn't get the credit that it actually deserves, we don't think about it because it takes a beating. It takes a punch, and it doesn't really give symptoms until it's really, really diseased. So we just kind of take it for granted versus, okay, our brain and our health, those are the superstars, but really we don't give the credit the liver deserves.
And the liver actually produces cholesterol, right?
Yeah, so the liver is like intensely involved in lipid management, not just the management of kind of the levels of it, but it does have to do with some formation of cholesterol as well. And then, of course, there's different components of cholesterol, which I know we'll get into.
I'm completely godsmacked on this because I literally, like, to me, kidneys work with the function of like getting things out of your system and pee and that whole thing. Liver was like, oh, it's the filter for my blood. Like it's as the blood is going through my system. So I really like minimized its job and its purpose and what it is it did.
Yeah. So why is this important? I mean, why do we need to pay attention to liver enzymes? So if my liver enzymes were elevated, what would be the cause of that?
Right. So there could be a lot of causes, right? And drinking could be one of them, but it's not always the cause. And so that's why there's so much more attention now. So what happens is, if we just kind of give it a 30-second snapshot here, what we know is that insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes are closely aligned with fat in the liver. The liver can have some fat, about 5% is about normal, but once it gets too much fat, what happens is the liver starts to try and heal itself. So when you cut your finger, and you see that cut, it swells, you get all the blood cells there to help heal it. The same thing happens in the liver, but it's unresolved, which means we start developing scar tissue in the process, and that scar tissue overtakes healthy liver tissue. So once we have enough healthy liver tissue taken over by disease tissue, the liver's just going to stop working. Now, the process to get from A to B is long, and that's a good thing. But that's really why the concern is. So we have statistics now that show that 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 individuals has fatty liver disease. And if they don't go to solve it, whether blood sugar management, whatever that means, they'll end up with cirrhosis. So not to be an alarmist, but if you live with it long enough, the chances of you getting liver cancer or dying from cirrhosis become much higher.
What do you mean not to be an alarmist?
Yeah. That's pretty alarming. I'm not going to lie.
I'm now squirming in my chair. I'm like, oh man, I can't imagine the shape that my liver is in.
But we're going to talk about how to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Oh my God,
and So I have a question though too, because when you say the words fatty liver, right? A thin, fit person like myself is like, well, I couldn't possibly have that because that doesn't make sense with what I do in my life, how I take care of myself. But could someone like me still have fatty liver, even though, I mean, I paid no attention to my liver, let's be real, but like I eat healthy and I exercise. Am I still possibly at risk of fatty liver?
Yeah, so your risk factors are going to be a lot less. There's no doubt about that. But let's say you've got some genetics that aren't working your way. Let's say that your mom had fatty liver or even gestational diabetes when she carried you. You are more at risk for developing fatty liver than someone who doesn't have that scenario. Let's also say that even though you're thin, let's say, and I'm not saying this is you, but let's say that if you do have fat, all of it is in your midsection, which is very close to organs. And you also happen to have your hemoglobin A1C happens to be high, your LDL happens to be high, then you're more at risk. So that's like a skinny fat version that we see all the time in my practice. But you like healthy eating, exercising, all those, your risk is much less than someone who doesn't adhere to those principles, for sure.
This term skinny fat, can you explain that? Because I love this. I know what you mean, but I want our audience to know what you mean by skinny fat.
Yeah, skinny fat is really just saying that you're thin in terms of like, okay, your waist size is probably perfectly fine. You look great in jeans. That's one thing I always say to my patients, but the outside looks great, but the inside might not look great at all.
Interesting.
So
okay.
I think, obviously we are a society that focuses on the outside. That's not an abnormal thing to say. But if the inside is not working, then we're still at risk for disease. We're still prone to disease.
You are right. I think we still, even though I think we've made such big moves in this, but we still think that healthy people are the skinny people, right? And that is just so not the case. We label or measure health on the way you look.
Yeah, your size is genetics plays such a big part in somebody's size, I would assume. So it's like
Absolutely.
But if you're not active, if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not eating well, genetically, even though you're thinner, it doesn't mean anything compared to somebody else. That it's like I always make a joke of, which I've now seen a few of, like skinny fat people, where I'm like, how is that possible? Like, you are skinny, but at the same time, you
so
like,
unhealthy.
Yeah, I can just look at, or that you have the body of a reader. Like, that's always a joke.
The body of a what?
The body
A
of
reader.
a reader. Like somebody that, like, all you do is sit around and read books. Like, there's
The body of a reader.
Yeah.
I didn't
All right,
know
so
that
wait,
that's a thing.
I have a question on a body of a reader. I know it's yeah.
So
it's
you
a
learn
visual, right?
something
You
new
get
here
it.
every day on Oldish. That is our job.
I have
That's what
a
we do.
question for you then, Kristin, on this popularity and rise of the GLP-1s and people having this supplement that
Wait,
then,
what are GLP-1s? Let's
like
get into that first.
Ozempic,
Ozempic, Wegovy.
Okay,
all those things.
got it. Okay.
How do you then feel about those? Because people are magically getting thin. They're not eating as much food. They're certainly don't have to exercise to be thin. Is this a side effect where people are now not paying attention to the nutrition they're actually getting, and so their liver is at a higher risk because of using GLP-1s?
Yeah, GLP-1s in liver health is really interesting because number one of the risk factors for fatty liver is rapid weight loss. So what happens is when you have rapid weight loss, you literally have a release of fat, and that can get stuck in the liver. I'm not using extreme medical terms here, but that's the concept of it. So there is that one risk factor.
I visualize like a
In
pool
terms of
filter, like when you have too much stuff.
Right,
in the pool.
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
I have about 50 patients right now that are on some sort of GLP-1 agonist drug. So that could be, again, Saxenda, Ozempic, that could be Wegovy. And there's a lot of different variation I see within them. But I will say this, Randy and I were talking about this. It's such an interesting place right now in health because the question is, when you get on these drugs, do you need to be on them for life? And if you're not on them for life, what happens when you dose down or you get off of them? We have to keep in mind that when people feel great on these drugs, they're eating less, they're drinking less, they don't have the cravings, they have a much quieter, what we call food noise. When you get off the drug, they come back with a vengeance. So the thing is, if we're not doing the right lifestyle tactics while we are on the drug, and that means optimizing protein, making sure you're drinking enough water, getting nutrient density literally in every bite because you're eating so much less, then when you get off the drug, you are much more likely to become more metabolically fatter, right? And so we were talking about that, where I was listening to a podcast recently where someone used that term. People that aren't taking the drug and changing lifestyle will become metabolically fatter because when they get off the drug, they've lost that muscle. And so that weight is going to get piled on, and now they've lost the muscle.
Well, then I would also think that there's got to be some sort of like a psychological of like, okay, I'm now not maintaining this skinny weight the same way I was when I was on it. So then there's a little bit more depression that comes in. Then you're changing your eating habits because of that, and you just sort of spiral back down. Because you don't have this thing that is like just the magic pill over it all that you're taking that is stabilizing. Interesting.
Right. And Brian, you're so right about that because I have patients that will go off, on. Some of them are even kind of delving a little bit more into disordered eating because they'll put on a few pounds and they'll say, oh my gosh, I have to get right back on it. And so there's a lot of complication, but I will say this. These drugs are a game changer in terms of health. For people that have obesity, for people that have diabetes, they are becoming literal lifesavers. People's numbers are becoming normal again or much lower. People are getting off of medication. So the question is, what do we do for the people that don't have diabetes and that don't have obesity? What about the people that want to lose 20 pounds? That's the challenging patient. Because in their head is, I'll lose the 20 pounds and then I'll get off of it. So that's really where the challenge comes into is those populations, which I see every single day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have had a guest on this show previously that's talked about peptides, and we did dive into the GLP-1 subject with them. And they did say that you can go long term with them on a very low dose because there are also other benefits with them. The Alzheimer's prevention. There is so many other things that these GLP-1s can benefit within your body, but it's at a very, very low dose that you can maintain for your life. Have you seen that research? What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. And that's like why a lot of my patients are getting on some of these drugs. Maybe they have to lose some weight, but they are seeing the data on Alzheimer's. They perhaps I was telling Randy, I have a patient who was a functioning alcoholic. They don't drink anymore. Like first shot. Took the first shot, cravings are gone for alcohol. So right now, like if you go to clinicaltrials.gov and you look at the research that is currently being done, not published, but currently underway, there are over 350 studies right now being done on GLP-1 agonist type drug classifications and their role in things that may be outside of weight loss. So even looking at Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, alcoholism, there is something going on with these drugs that is really helping a lot of people, and we have to kind of figure out what that looks like. But yes, the research is really promising for it. And, if you can take something that will help minimize your risk factors for things like Alzheimer's, then it seems pretty attractive to take that. And you're right. I do see people going at very, very low doses, and they'll do that more long term. I've also seen the opposite where people are low dose and they think, well, 3 pounds a week isn't enough, so I'm going to up my dose. And then they start having complications. They start, so it's just kind of like the low dose or what we kind of refer to as a micro dose might be the right aspect to look at. But this conversation is not ending. We will continue to have it for the next 5 to 6 years, and we'll continue to see more research.
It must be hard being in your field. You have because exactly what you're just saying about we as human beings now with technology, with everything is instant gratification. We just want the magic switch to make it happen instantly. And what do you mean 3 pounds isn't enough a month? Like that is unbelievable change. But we're so impatient today that we almost our health be damned, like we want the instant fix to it, worry about the consequences later. And it sucks that you have these miracle drugs come out, but then people abuse them. The pendulum swings so far the other way, and then we have to find the middle. Then we have to find the balance with it.
I feel like the problem with the miracle drugs is that somebody gets on something like Ozempic and they have this rapid weight loss and they feel better about themselves, but it's like, okay, if they would treat it as, okay, I'm using Ozempic and that is part of the problem, but I still need to get in and do some therapy. I need to work. I need to get to the root of the issues that, that helped create what the problem was in the beginning. Then you're not so worried about the fluctuation of weights or low dosing and then, 3 pounds isn't enough. You're in a much healthier headspace to deal with it.
It can be an obsession.
But people skip that step. They look for the one. They go, this is solving all of it. I feel better. But then that doesn't last forever. I mean, you have to assume, okay, I've now lost all this weight, but now I don't feel completely better or as good as I thought I would.
Yeah.
Right.
So then they start relying on other things, and then
I'm tired.
You spiral in different directions. It can almost become like a butterfly effect. It seems, if you don't deal with all of the issues that you can possibly find.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had patients who are avid runners and they stop running. And I said, why did you stop running? I don't have the energy anymore. I'm just not eating enough anymore. I'm still walking, but so there is some give and take sometimes, but you're absolutely right. And I kind of define this in my patient population as the why. Right? We all have a why. And a lot of it sometimes is fear-based. There's someone that came before us, your parents, your brother, your sister, whatever, and you don't want to become that person. So that person had cancer, that person had Alzheimer's, and you think, okay, I don't want to become that. That becomes your why. And that we know from studies is really what maintains long-term behavior change. It's not, I need to drop 50 pounds to look great in a wedding dress. That's a short-term behavior change. So I think that's the thing. It's like incorporating the long-term behavior change is really the key to success in trying to figure out, okay, what does my pattern look like from a lifestyle perspective? What can I do today, tomorrow, 5 years from now, a decade from now?
Absolutely.
But do you get clients, because I know I do in my coaching practice, do you get clients who they see a parental figure or a grandfather, grandmother, someone that had, heart disease or they had a certain type of cancer or diabetic. Is it enough for them to always make the behavioral changes around, let's say, diet and exercise? Because a lot of times I feel like people, they see that short-term goals help because it helps for motivation. But in terms of these long-term, I don't want to end up like that, it seems that people still have a hard time making the changes because it seems far off and it's not exactly relevant until their numbers come back or until there's a health scare and they go, oh no, I'm scared. I have to do something about this.
Yeah, well, that's definitely very accurate, especially in people that are much younger. It's like, if we use Alzheimer's for an example, Alzheimer's can start showing up in the brain up to 30 years before a symptom occurs. So if you're not having a symptom, you probably don't worry about it that much. It's just so far off. I actually had a doctor tell me once that, like, the things that plagued my parents, I won't have to worry about. There's going to be drugs for that once I get to their age. So it's kind of like it kind of gives you the free pass, but really, and you're right about what you said about that short term. I just want to enjoy today. I just want to enjoy the food, the drink, and then I'll worry about it tomorrow. But the studies are very clear that it is a accumulation of impact that happens over the course of decades. It's not one food that did you in or one behavior that did you in. I mean, you could argue that smoking and alcoholism could be the one behavior, but it is decades of making choices that work against you, that lead to some of these things. And you're right, it's hard to see into the future, especially when we do have pharmacological indicators, right? Like you got something to lower my cholesterol, then when I get high cholesterol, I'll take it, right? But so I think that's a normal thing to think about. But what does it say about how we feel today, our energy levels, our happiness? We know that a poor diet is also related to depression and anxiety. So even from a nutritional psychology standpoint, how do we find a dietary pattern that fits better with mental health, that makes us feel good about today, whether we're thinking about those diseases 30 years from now or not?
Let's talk about this.
Okay.
Let's dive into nutrition, because I know you both have.
I was just going to say,
I actually want to ask, and I think it's going to lead to nutrition because big questions about the food, especially in America. But I've recently seen from two different accounts on Instagram, right? There's photo taken from, I want to say the 50s or the 60s at a beach. And
right.
Nobody is overweight. Everybody is fit on that beach. Not a single person is. And it's wild when you look. You try and spot it, and it doesn't seem to be. But today, if you go to a beach and you see that, we have many different shapes of bodies, large and small. And we are predominantly in the larger size now. And I know everybody is beautiful and you don't have to be skinny to be healthy. No one's saying all those people were healthy in the 50s. But why is it that obesity and weight gain is such a big thing and so hard for people to manage now when it didn't seem that way 50 years ago?
Yeah, we actually have something to relate to more variety in the grocery stores to look at that. So that's number one. You would think that having, in our grandmother's day, she would walk into a store and there would be maybe five, if she was lucky, great-grandmother, let's say, breads to choose from. Now there's like 50. And so you would think that the variety creates more informed decisions. The data shows the exact opposite. Variety does not create informed decisions. So that's kind of number one. Number two, we have the formation of ultra-processed foods, which has taken over a huge chunk of our grocery stores, which is something that, our grandparents did not have. They may have had minimally processed foods, but they didn't have ultra-processed foods. So now we have foods that are cheap. Ultra-processed foods, sometimes some experts will refer to it as industrial formulations. So there's really, at the end of the day, no food involved in it whatsoever. And there's something called a NOVA classification, which classifies things as minimally processed, processed, and ultra-processed. Okay, so minimally processed would be baby carrots, right? That is a processed food because it's different from a carrot that you're going to pull from the ground, okay? And then processed might be a breakfast cereal, because the breakfast cereal, you know, they're taking the grain and processing it to be in this, like, you know,
they're pouring it into a mold and they're drying it to a certain shape, and
lots of machines to get it to there. It's being fortified with
there's no
all
cereal
sorts
growing on a tree anywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. But then ultra processed gets into, like, let's say sugary sodas. There's really, it's all industrial. There's no food. There's tons of additives, tons of ingredients. You know, there's a kind of a twofold problem with this. Number one, we can't stop eating them. So, like, I tell my patients, when you go to a movie theater, if you were to take a king-size bag of licorice and you consume it, you'd walk out of that movie theater and be like, well, that was a great movie. Let's go grab dinner. Like, you could have consumed 2,500, 3,000 calories. And it's like nothing. You took the same amount of calories. No one would do this, obviously. But you take the same amount of calories and, like, eat broccoli.
You'd be full.
Stop.
You'd be
at,
so
like, 300
full.
Calories.
Right.
Yeah.
You'd be stuffed. You'd start having gas. Like, you just.
So I was having this
Especially
conversation.
broccoli.
I was having this conversation yesterday with someone about candy bars, and he was like, "Oh, you know, I never ate these candy bars when I was a kid." And we were talking about him, and he was saying, like, "Oh, have you tried them now?" And I said, "You know, I used to eat them when I was younger, but I don't now." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because in their steps of trying to make things less expensive to produce, they have come up with ways of, instead of using the caramel that was in a bar when I was younger or my parents were younger, it's now all chemical to create a substance that looks
natural flavors
and tastes the same, but costs, you know, a quarter
So
as
much
much
less.
to make."
So true. Case in point, Halloween candy, right? The
Oh,
trick or
it's bad.
treating. I did not give my daughters this, not saying that, you know, we're so high and mighty, but we just didn't do it. And then they really wanted one, and they were smelling, and they opened it. I said, you know, you can have a bite, taste it. And they took a bite, and they were like,
tastes like chemicals, right?
What is all
it?
the stuff?
Not even
in
food.
Yeah,
It tastes
it's
like chemicals.
foreign.
And if you look at all the chemicals, it's so foreign. It's sort of like the McDonald's way back in the day. McDonald's French fries used to be, it was potatoes, salt, and beef tallow. Beef fat cooked with, you know,
Right.
fries cooked in beef fat. Now
It's barely potato.
like soybean oil, cottonseed oil. There's all of these different preservatives. So, yeah, I mean, don't those things make a difference? Because I know there's a lot of, they call this the anti-diet movement, and some of these titles kind of drive me crazy. Because you have some people on social media saying all these things about, you know, don't eat this and don't eat that, and the seed oils are all bad. And then you have other people saying, no, that's not true. And it's really hard to cut through the noise
to know what's real.
I think it would be super helpful for you to really dissect this a little bit, to understand where these like what side to be on, and how do we wind up in the middle to make some of the best choices.
How do we avoid the fact that when you walk into a store or a movie theater or anything, 99% of the things are now highly processed and create, and they're so bad for you.
Yeah, and my thing is,
so what do you do? How do you live a normal life
and
within
a healthy
this
life.
current time?
Yeah.
You know, and take care of your liver and your health that way.
So I think we have to stop looking at food as good or bad. I put food in actually one of three buckets. So bucket one is going to be, this is going to contribute to better health span, right? Health span is the amount of years that we enjoy good health, different from lifespan, which is just the amount of years we live, right? But 20, your last years can suck, okay? So health span is actually a lot more important than lifespan. So, you know, this food may help contribute to lifespan, to health span. So that's bucket number one. Bucket number two is, if I have too much of this food, it may inhibit how long my health span is. And bucket three is a neutral. So I think the neutral is where we should focus on. Let's use Diet Cola as an example, because I think every patient that comes in my door, typically women, they're like, I can't give up Diet Cola. All right, I get it. So if you have a Diet Cola once a day, that is very different for your health span versus the only thing I drink is Diet Cola and I have 4 or 5 a day. So I think, like, Brian, to your point, if you're going to a movie theater and you're like, okay, I'm gonna have
one night a week, I'm gonna do milk duds and some popcorn and some things.
Yeah, one night a week, and then the rest of your diet looks good, and you're getting stress management, and you're sleeping well. That's not really going to be a huge impact to your health span. So what we've done in the United States is we've said, well, good, either good or bad. And Randy, you said it correctly where you mentioned the seed oils, right? All seed oils are bad. That's a really overclassification of nutritional science when people say that. So if you have seed oils, and that's the only oil you have, that may not impact your health span really great. But let's say you have a seed oil every once in a while, and for the most part, you're using avocado oil, you're using extra virgin olive oil. That's going to help increase your health span. So it's kind of like looking at the blue zones and looking at their 80-20 perspective. 80% of the time they're eating healthy. They might not eat healthy to our standards and our definitions 100% of the time. They might have a cookie every once in a while. But the cookie is not the norm. So how do we take the foods that help enhance our health span and make that the norm and lose the shame and the guilt that we have when we're having things that don't contribute to health span? That's the key, and that is really, really hard to do.
I always hate when somebody says to me, oh, you can't eat any of those seed oils or something like that because they're all bad for you. And it's like, that's unavoidable to do. So what's the best ones that I can what's the best for my body? If I have no choice, I'm going to either eat a stick, a twig off of a tree, or I'm going to go to a restaurant, what is that's the guidance that I need. I don't need somebody saying the all or nothing kind of thing. That doesn't help me at all.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point. It's food psychology and behavior around food too, because if you now have labeled all these things bad, wrong, then every time you eat that food, the code that's going in is bad or wrong.
You bring it to your mouth and you're like, oh, I'm killing myself.
Right. So it almost seems like there's a better focus on what's great, what is healthy, like superfood. That kind of drives me crazy, but what are these things? The first bucket that you talked about, what's going to be additive to my health? What is going to fuel me so that when I eat this, I'm putting, I was eating blueberries this morning, and I've been trying to eat more fruit. You think I eat a lot of fruit, but I really don't.
Right.
I don't. I actually don't think I get enough.
You can always consume more fruit.
I don't do a lot of grains, Kristin. I don't feel good when I eat them. And so for me, it's harder to get lots of fiber. So I'm trying to eat broccoli and cauliflower and carrots and root vegetables and but it's like this morning I had a little piece of chicken and I had my blueberries and my butternut squash and I was eating and I was literally standing there rocking back and forth, and I just felt good because the colors I was seeing in front of me, I was like, I feel, whether it's true or not, that this is good, that this I'm doing something healthy for myself. Does that help to actually look at what could I add here as opposed to I can never and I have to take this all away?
Oh, totally. I totally agree with that. I think some of the things that we and by the way, you're not to always cite studies, but there are strong studies show that when we find
Randy's very study oriented, so yeah.
I love it. I love geeking out, right? But when we, I always say, no one really cares about my opinion. They just care about my interpretation of data. My opinion doesn't really matter. It's interpretation of data. But when we look at the studies, when we adhere to our personal, our cultural, and our religious preferences, we tend to be happier with our food choices. So let's just dive into the personal. I've had patients that will come in and I'll always say, you know what, before we start, tell me your non-negotiable. Because we all have one. It's usually bacon. What's your non-negotiable? What are you not giving up?
Usually bacon. It's understandable.
It turns every
delicious.
Vegetarian.
Oh, it's delicious.
Bacon tastes delicious.
Yeah.
It's delicious. So then instead of saying, oh, well, bacon's bad, you can't have bacon, bacon causes cancer and Alzheimer's and all these things where we're seeing data of high intakes of processed meat, let's instead reverse the conversation and say, okay, let's see, where can we fit bacon into the diet? What if I said, like, let's choose a day every week where you can have some bacon? Would that be great? Oh, that'd be awesome. I thought you were going to cut it out from my diet, right? So now we start this process. Or, okay, you don't love kale. Okay, everyone's like, oh, you got to eat kale if you want to be healthy. No, you don't. You can eat spinach. You can eat collard greens. It doesn't have to be kale. So what is your personal preferences? What are some of the things that you feel happiest eating? And then if it doesn't help with that health span, where can we fit it in where it's not the starring role? It's just kind of like, a little bit of a side person, right? So that's really the way to look at it. You're right. Restriction, if restriction worked, we'd be the healthiest nation on the face of the earth. Right, like we're
right, but
great
we don't have the willpower. I'm
terrible
don't have
at
the
restriction.
Willpower. When somebody's like, "You can't eat that," I'm like, "What do you mean?
What do you mean
I can't eat that? I'm a
Right.
grown man. You
All
can't
I'm
tell
gonna
me
eat.
what I can and can't do."
And that's what I'm referring to when I'm saying we're great at it. We love to restrict, whether it's calories or something else. We're like a nation of like, restrict this, but it doesn't last. We end up going to what we know, what we like, what makes us feel good. So let's just see how we can do that to begin with, but have a structure of a diet that essentially will be nutrient dense enough to get us to a long life where we don't have disability before we die.
Kristin, do you think it is possible, especially with the way that food is now and today? And let's be real, it's also more affordable for people to eat ultra-processed foods and some of these things. So that definitely comes into play. But even if you eat the healthiest of diets, do you still need to take supplements to supplement what you're not getting? Or is it entirely possible to get everything from food?
Yeah. So number one, it depends, number one, on how you're defining healthy. We've been waiting for many years for the FDA to define healthy, and they have not yet done it. Now, they did do a kind of call for comments in the past 2 years, so we do think the FDA will define healthy soon. Why is that important? Because once they define it, food packaging will start putting it on their package, on their front of package claims. They'll put like healthy choice but until it's defined, they can't do that. So that's kind of number one. From a supplement standpoint, there are some things that the body either doesn't do well on its own or needs a little bit of a boost based on that why. So vitamin D is a great example of this. The best source of vitamin D is the UV rays of the sun. It's not salmon, it's not cod liver oil, right? Like eat salmon until your eyes pop out. If you are living in a community where sunlight is not abundant or strong enough, you're more likely to be vitamin D deficient. So, kind of what's the next step? It's not just popping the pill. Go to your doctor, get your vitamin D levels checked, and then figure out what your dose is. So that's one example. If we look at something like Alzheimer's and dementia or heart disease, and let's say you eat great diet, but you just can't stand fish. You just don't like salmon. You don't like trout. Then an omega-3 fatty acid might be a good option. So it really is going to be dependent on, what does that healthy diet look like and where are the nutritional gaps, right? No one has a perfect diet. I don't have a perfect diet. So I'm going to look at, okay, where's some of the nutritional gaps that I might have? And that's where I might choose to supplement on top of that.
Oh, that
makes sense. That's great
so
advice.
important because that's the one thing that everyone is wanting is the perfect diet. And I don't know
if there is one.
I'm sorry to not have trust here, but I don't know if the FDA is going to go, here is the exact perfect diet, because it also it matters where you live, the community that you're around,
I was
your
say,
lifestyle.
You've spoken about like metabolic dieting too. Now, does blood type play a part into that? Like how deep does that rabbit hole go? I mean, how unique is diet to each person?
Yeah, I think personalized nutrition is really kind of the wave of the future, whether we look at something like nutrigenomics, which is a genetic test that will tell you where you're most likely to see dietary deficiencies. At Cleveland Clinic, we do nutrigenomics testing on a lot of our patients, and it is really helpful, even to figure out, okay, here you need a supplement here because you're much less likely to take it in your diet and you're just not getting enough. That can be determined by a nutrigenomics test. So that's kind of one indicator. But really, if we look at not so much blood type, because the studies on blood type have really been like debunked as far as blood type follows diet. It's popular, but we don't have a lot of randomized controlled trials that would indicate that it's a really great option to look at. But your blood numbers, your metabolic numbers, if you are someone who has high LDL, if you're someone who has a high hemoglobin A1C, which is a 3-month marker of blood sugar management, yeah, you probably want to shift some of your dietary choices a little bit for that one number to improve. And that gets into like the chicken and the egg, right? So even I just did a presentation last week on GLP-1 agonist drugs. And I gave this picture of a chicken and an egg. And I said, well, are people improving their cardiovascular health because they're losing weight? And weight loss alone improves your lipid panel, your blood sugar numbers. Or are they improving cardiovascular health simply because of the drug, right? And so we need more research and time to determine that. But yes, I think, long answer to probably a brief question, but personalized nutrition is just as important as overall personalized health. I mean, it's the key to us living longer and better.
So what would you suggest then? Somebody going in and like having a full blood panel done and getting as much information about what's going on in their body as possible, and then tailoring it all from that point forward?
Yeah, I would look, I'm really biased. I mean, at Cleveland Clinic, we have an interdisciplinary team approach. So when you would come to see us, you would see someone like Randy. So you'd see the life coach. Like I can tell you over and over again, eat more broccoli. But if you're like, just can't do it, then Randy's your guy, not me, because he's got to change your head. I'm just going to tell you what are the right options for health, right? But I can't change your head. So like working with a therapist, a life coach, working with maybe we have a Chinese herbal medicine specialist, right? Like if you're a woman who's peri or postmenopausal, do you want to start looking at some herbs? What does that look like in conjunction with the other pharmaceuticals you're taking? Where do we typically find this? Integrative and functional medicine providers are probably going to be the best option to look at a whole body holistic approach. And yes, I'm biased, but that is the approach I would take. Let's look at all the different aspects. When Randy and I were talking earlier, I talked about the perfect storm. When someone has a stroke, when someone gets Alzheimer's, it's not one thing that caused it. It is a perfect storm of indicators. So let's figure out what it is, if you had a bag and you could put your perfect storm components in it, what are those components? And how do we then break those up one by one? What does that look like from a lifestyle perspective?
That's great advice.
Okay, 2 laser questions before we go.
Okay.
Number one, cholesterol, fat. I can't tell you how many discussions I've had with people, and I don't want to argue, but I want to know the definitive from the data. Does fat make you fat? Does fat cause higher cholesterol, barring that 10%, 15, 20% might have some sort of genetic mutation, but like for the general population, should I be worried about eating egg yolks versus the whole, not eating egg yolks versus just having the whole egg?
Yeah, no, cholesterol in food does not cause cholesterol to increase in the body. We started getting some real bad science in the 1950s about saturated fat, and we have evidence of suppression of data that occurred the next 3 decades of really kind of taking sugar off as like, oh, sugar's not the bad guy, it's fat. Well, we found out it was sugar. So cholesterol does not increase cholesterol. That has been debunked, so much so that the dietary guidelines for Americans actually changed their guidelines in about 6 or 7 years
2015,
ago.
I think, right? 17, 15?
So that means that I'm not going to be seeing those commercials of the eggs in the jail cell anymore.
Right, exactly.
That's a
No.
shame.
I think eggs are great.
commercials.
They have like a lot of nutrient density, so I think eggs are great. So yeah, fat doesn't cause cause fats, sugar is much more, and refined carbohydrates is much more likely to cause your cholesterol, your LDL, to go up.
Okay, great. Because I was going to ask, I was like, all right. And I asked this because it's my mum. Since she moved here from Australia, she moved here with perfect cholesterol. Perfect. Never had an issue. And within 2 years, her good cholesterol has dropped dramatically and her bad cholesterol has skyrocketed. And she eats relatively healthy, but what did that? What caused that?
It's probably the different production of food as well. She's probably maybe eating more, maybe without even knowing it. It could also be age. It could be that in 2 years, her hormonal health has changed. When women, when their hormones change, when estrogen goes down, our risk of heart disease goes up substantially. There's studies looking at Japanese women, and it's really fascinating looking at their risk of breast cancer. And then within about 5 to 10 years of migrating to the United States, their risk of breast cancer goes up to the risk of an American woman.
Wow.
Even though they're still eating the same type of cuisine, they're adding in some other things that impact that. So I'm not surprised at all to hear that your mother's health risk has changed simply from moving from one place to another. We are not in the business of, even though you might hear this all the time, like we're all about preventative health. Our healthcare system is a sick care system. It is less likely to be a preventative healthcare system.
Right. Oh.
So true.
Kristin, I could keep talking to you. I have so many more questions that I want to ask you, but this has been an amazing episode. Thank you so much for joining us. It was so informative, and what I love about you is it's so digestible and easy to understand, and I think that's what's going to be amazing for our listeners too. Tell everybody that's listening where they can find you.
And your book.
And your book as well.
Yeah, thank you. So my new book is Regenerative Health. The liver, by the way, is the only organ that
that's
regenerates.
the star.
Yeah,
Right.
The liver's the star. We've learned that.
Yes.
So Regenerative Health, I'm on Instagram at Fuel Well with Chrissy. So if you fuel well, you feel well. And my website is KristinKirkpatrick.com. So thank you so much. It's been such a privilege to join you, and I love all three
Kristin,
of you.
it was so nice. It was so nice having you on here. I think this topic is
huge.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard for people to understand just these little changes that they can make and where to even start.
Yeah,
little
it's
bits at a time. The more we
Yeah.
talk about it, the more we can just gain a little bit of insight, like these baby steps.
Absolutely. Kristin, you're a gift. Thank you for coming and hanging with us today. And for everybody that is listening, thank you so much for tuning into our episode. We hope you loved it as much as we did. Always let us know how you feel about it. And if you are interested in watching your podcasts, we offer that option now. So you can head over to oldishpodcast.com and you'll be able to see the options. But if you are tuning in and watching us now, stay tuned for after the show.
Hey, if you're going through something right now, if you need additional support, then please reach out to me at randyspelling.com/help or go to my Instagram at randyspelling. Thanks.